this. Why am I talking about this? This is an email he sent me. I think he's probably heard me speak before and knows that I'm not real exciting, so he thought maybe if I said some really radical things, it'd keep you awake. But the fact is I've been looking at privatization in the area of law for a couple of decades now in terms of research, in terms of what's going on. And so this really is one of my favorite topics. Maybe it'll be one of yours when I'm done, or maybe it won't. But let me talk a little bit about what I mean here by privatization first. Privatization, the term is used in different ways. Some people think of contracting out with a private firm to produce some sort of government service. My hometown contracts out for garbage collection. That's not what I mean by privatization. Some people think of privatization as taking some publicly owned entity and turning it over to the private sector. That's part of what I mean by privatization, but what I mean when I'm talking about privatization is both demand and supply are driven by private sector decisions. So contracting out is not privatization because the government is still deciding what's going to be produced. So when you have privatization, of course, at least if you don't use the government to create monopolies with it or something like that, you're going to have competition. And you're going to have competition both in price and in quality of services. And I think that's a key factor in the area of law because quality of services that we're getting from the public sector is far from exceptional, I guess. I tie decriminalization and privatization together. I'm focusing on the law that we think of as criminal law in this talk. I've written about privatization in contract law and other areas as well, but I'm focusing on criminal law here. The distinction, of course, between a criminal violation and a civil violation is that in criminal justice the focus is on, I guess you might say, justice for the criminal, punishment. In civil law, the focus is on compensation for the victim. And I think we've gone way too far in the direction of worrying about punishing people instead of worrying about the people that have been harmed and worrying about them being even if they can't be made whole, at least compensated to a degree. And I'm not talking, some states have compensation programs for crime victims. I'm not talking about that kind of compensation either. What I'm interested in is, let's see, I'll go one more first. It is in creating a system of law that focuses on victims, that focuses the objective on making victims whole or at least compensating. And that's what we do with tort law to a substantial degree in the United States. So it's not like we don't have any model about how to do this. I will be focusing on then how to go about through decriminalization and privatization, moving our what is now considered to be criminal law into the civil law side of the process. As I said, there are both crimes and torts. Crimes are created through legislation. Crimes are things that a king or a legislature have said are illegal and therefore are punishable by the government for using prison or capital punishment or whatever it is that they're going to do. Tort is compensating victims for their losses or for the harms they've suffered. There's lots of privatization, injustice, as I said, in contract law today. The vast majority of all contract disputes are privately arbitrated within commercial organizations, trade associations. They have their own rules, may or may not look like the state's rules, but they're enforced within the association through ostracism, threats, and private arbitration. Robert Ellickson wrote a very interesting book called Order Without Law with the subtitle How Neighbors Resolve Disputes. And he actually went in, observed an area in California, a rural area, and discovered that these neighbors don't go to court when they get upset about something that the neighbor has done. They talk, they bargain, they come up with ways to resolve their disputes without going into the adversarial court system. So, crime created by the state. A little bit of history here. The things we think of as crimes, what you might think of as the core crimes of murder, robbery, theft, rape, auto theft, burglary, arson, the things that the Federal Bureau of Investigation keeps track of. All of those crimes at one time in history were tort. They didn't have the word tort then, but they were all illegal, but in a system where the objective was to obtain restitution for their victims. So in Anglo-Saxon England, for instance, if someone steals from one of his neighbors, they raise what they call a hue and cry. Everybody comes out and they go find out what's going on and go after the bad guy. And if they catch him, they don't string him up or anything like that. They take him to a court where he is tried. Not trials like we see today, but nonetheless a trial that everyone accepted. And if he's found guilty, he's ordered to compensate the person he harmed. They even had compensation for murder. In fact, you could, as they said, buy back the peace by paying a sufficient compensation, even for murder. They only let you do that once, though. If you did it twice, you were no longer going to be able to buy back the peace. These are the core crimes that I'm going to talk about. There are huge numbers of political crimes that I'm not even going to touch on. You can see some figures here. Nobody can count the number of crimes there are in the United States according to statute. People are trying. The best estimate just at the federal level, this is the 2008 estimate, 4,450 federal crimes that is declared by the Congress, and another 300,000 regulations that if you violate them, you can be punished through the criminal justice system. Lots of people are writing about this over-criminalization and saying we need to get back to the core crimes. I want to get all the way back to tort and move even those core crimes out of the hands of the current criminal justice system. When I say decriminalization, I'm not saying legalization. I'm saying offenses with identifiable victims, whether they're violent or theft or whatever, which are considered to be crimes now should be treated as tort rather than crime, that the offender is taking an action against an individual victim, not against the state. And so the victim is the one that should be compensated. Instead, the way it works now is that we victimize everybody else by collecting taxes from them, and then we put the offender in prison, so he then is stigmatized by being in jail. He can't get work, so he commits more crimes and all of that sort of stuff, because we focus on punishment rather than on making the victims whole. How might it work? Well, it's a complex process. I wrote a book trying to describe how it works. So I can't tell you the whole story today, but I'm going to try to get through a fair amount of it. And the way I'm going to do it is just to think about how we go about obtaining justice, whether it's through tort or through crime, and then talk about how the private sector could or would do each of these things. The first thing, of course, is if someone commits an offense against a victim, it has to be observed, or it has to be reported to somebody who can then investigate and apprehend, whether it's arresting or giving a subpoena to or something like that, the wrongdoer. So that is presumably the task of the public police today. I'll talk more about private policing. There's an amazing amount of private policing going on in the world. Might be done by a law firm or an insurance investigator. All sorts of other things could do this. But the point is that if there's an offense, it has to be observed, or its consequences have to be observed, and then you have to find the bad guy. Next, of course, if the offender denies his guilt, and he may be innocent, you can't assume he's guilty, then you have to investigate that. You have to try to find out, find evidence to indicate whether he's guilty or innocent. And after that, if you feel like you have enough evidence, you have to charge the offender and prosecute him, either through private justice procedures. Tort law is prosecuted by victims. They hire a lawyer who goes and acts to prosecute the case against the offender. So it could be done that way, or we have, of course, our public prosecution officials as well. Then, of course, the prosecution has to be successful so that the individual receives a sentence. It could be imprisonment in the current system. It would be compensation payments in the system I'm going to talk about. The sentence has to be carried out. So you have to put the guy in prison and make him serve his term, or you have to make sure he pays. And I put this note here. The fact is, of course, that virtually no criminals ever serve their full sentence in the system we have today. Lots of people serve much less of a sentence than they're given. But I'm not really going to go into a lot of detail about the alternative, our public system. Okay, so starting with that first step, reporting the crime. Look at the information I put up here about how frequently people report crimes to the public police now that they're when they're victimized. it's year after year, it's somewhere around 40% report the crimes when they're victimized. And it varies a lot from across crime categories. People report auto thefts because they got car insurance and they have to have evidence that the car was stolen, so they need a police report. They don't report auto thefts because they think the police are going to put the car back. Obviously, a couple of ways we can think about trying to encourage people to report crimes, because if we're going to count on deterrence, if we're going to count on trying to convince people that they shouldn't commit crimes or torts, then if we don't even put them in the system, they're not going to get any signals about why they shouldn't be doing it. They just can keep on doing it. So in order to increase the deterrent effect of our criminal justice system, probably the weakest link in the criminal justice system in terms of deterrence might be in the area of reporting. So many crimes don't get reported that it's hard to imagine criminals thinking that there's a high probability that they're going to be punished. You can lower the cost of reporting. You might think, well, that's not much to that. Just call the police. But that's not what happens. Call the police, then you've got to be interviewed by the police, and then maybe by a junior prosecutor, and then by another prosecutor, and they change prosecutors before you get the case in court, so you have to be interviewed by that guy, and you got to show up at court. And all the time, the prosecutor is plea bargaining with the criminal to make sure it doesn't go to trial, but you do all this stuff to get it ready for trial. And then plea bargains. The other way, of course, is to raise the expected benefits of reporting, and that, I think, is one obvious reason to think about restitution. If they think they're going to be compensated for their losses, the incentive to report the crime certainly are a lot higher. I mean, some people think there's way too much tort action going on in our civil system today because people file claims all the time, and lawyers charge contingency fees, and so it isn't very costly to file. If we had compensation as the objective of the process, I think a lot more criminals or victims would be reporting their crimes and trying to cooperate with whoever it is who's pursuing the criminal so that they could get the restitution. The other part, of course, that we want to think about up front for victims is crime prevention. The idea of deterrence, not just through actually arresting people, but deterrence through watching, through observing your surroundings and having locks on your doors and alarms on your windows and things like that. The public police have historically waited for crimes to occur and then respond. Yeah, they patrol a little bit. There's an area in New York now that the city council apparently passed a resolution that the police can't drive into that area because they apparently go in there with the patrol cars and sleep. So they're trying to keep them from going in there and staying on the streets. But private security operates very differently. Private security is about watching to prevent. If a crime is committed, then essentially they fail because their job is preventing the crime. Empirical studies are starting to come out on the effectiveness of this private security force that we have. one of which is with one of my students. We find that private security has a significant negative impact on most crimes. So the more private security there is in a community, the fewer crimes there are. That might seem surprising because private security is supposed to protect individual targets, but the benefits spill over. There's a study not yet published by some people up at the University of Pennsylvania, found that because of the private police force at the University of Pennsylvania, crime rates are 40% lower around the university than they are in other similar areas in town. So there are these kinds of spillover effects that reduce crimes, and our empirical results suggest that if we increase the number of private security firms by 10.2%, by 10%, then we get a 10.2% decrease in violent crimes in the area, a 3.2% decrease in property crimes in the area. So private police do deter, or private security does deter, and pretty effectively. They don't usually pursue, but they do deter. If you think about that number, I said a 10% increase in private security reduces violent crime by 10%. Of course, you can't extrapolate that too far, but just to show you the dramatic increase we've seen in private security employment in the United States. Going back to 1964, coming up to 2011, you can see a jump from about 2,000 private security firms to over 25,000 private security firms in the United States. Same trend all over the world. There's 5 million private security personnel in China today. So people are turning to private security for protection, for deterrence against their properties, and this big investment in private security is generating benefits for all of this group. Those numbers I put up, those are just firms specializing in security. So, and that's their employment here in this column. So this is just private security firms offering their services and the number of employees they have. Lots of organizations have in-house security that aren't counted in here. It's very difficult to know how much in-house security there is. There was a big survey of 4,000 firms in 2005. These are big corporations. You can see 56.5% of them said their security is in-house. They're not hiring those guys on the first page. Another more extensive study claims that there's about 40% of the private security in the country is in-house. Big difference in those numbers. It's really, again, as I said, difficult to know exactly how much in-house security there is, but it is pretty substantial. They're estimated now that there's 3 times as many private security personnel in the United States as there are public police. In 1964 was the first number I had out there. I think in 1964 they were roughly equal. So I think that private security has expanded 3 times public police. So people are turning to the market even if we don't know they don't. And so all I'm saying is unleash this market and let it go further. What do these guys do? About 75% are still just guards and patrolmen because their job is to prevent crimes from occurring. And so there are the stereotypical, minimum wage, night watchman, probably dozing against the wall. But there are lots of really high-trained, knowledgeable experts in security, technology, highly trained individuals. Of course, one thing that public police do when they retire with their big pensions is then they go and open a private security firm. So those guys are at least as trained as much as our public police. And so we see a whole range of security personnel, from people simply doing watching to these individuals making 7 figures a year for developing the security system for some big corporation and that sort of thing. And of course, the other indication of how important this market is, we can think about what they protect. Obviously, large corporations, if you've ever been, we talked about casinos earlier today, there's so much security in those casinos that it's a bad place to try to commit a robbery. Very few people even get out the door. It's surprising how much government stuff is protected by private security. They hire, contract out for private security to do that. All of our nuclear reactors, all of our major chemical plants are protected by private security. They really ramped it up after 9/11. And so these guys protecting those nuclear reactors are heavily armed, modern soldiers, essentially. One thing about the private sector is you get what you pay for. If you want a night watchman, you get that, and you don't have to pay very much. If you want someone trained and skilled to protect a very dangerous target, then you can get that. Public police tend to all have the same training. They may specialize to a degree within their departments, but the private sector can specialize tremendously across the various kinds of things they do. So we have gated communities, we have all the financial market being protected by private security. There's whole areas in downtowns and cities that are controlled by private security. Most of the 3,000 plus U.S. colleges and universities have private security. 25% of the universities actually have their own private sworn officer police forces that are independent of public police. Lots of hospitals, lots of things, lots of different targets are being protected. The incentives are different when you're working for the public police and the private sector. These two individuals are public police officers. This guy was at a rally in Washington, public police rally, trying to drum up more support for the public police, demanding more respect and so on. I don't know if he could run down a thief or not. This one is waiting for something to happen. He's eating a donut at the same time, so I like that picture. When you think about private security, these are the officers who work for a private security firm in Tampa, Florida, called Critical Intervention Services. And you can see that they're totally involved in the community. They know the people. And this firm started out offering its services to low-income landlords of low-income housing. which crime rates in those low-income housing projects were very high. This guy saw a niche in the market and said, you know, I bet I can sell some services to those people and reduce the amount of crime, reduce the amount of vandalism, reduce the turnover rate in tenants, all those sorts of things, by supplying them with private security. He did so, his business exploded. He's doing the same thing all over Florida. He's turned international. So he focuses on protecting poor people, essentially, but he's being paid by the landlord. And you might say, well, then the tenants are paying, but if the turnover rate falls and the vandalism falls and all those sorts of things fall, the costs may be falling more than the cost of the security. These guys have substantial training. He hires former military police and things like that. You can see they wear uniforms, so people know who they are. They are in better shape than those guys I showed you that look like the police. I'm not in good shape myself, but I don't have to chase robbers. I just have to run students after I grade their name. The investigation and how would we handle investigation? Well, there's a lot of private investigation going on. You think of private investigators, a lot of them just are investigating for divorces and things like that. But insurance companies hire investigators a lot. There are, as I said, private police forces. Lots of colleges have private police forces. One example of private police force in the United States and Canada, actually, is the railroad police. This system of private policing for the railroads was created at the end of World War I. And as you can see from some of the numbers here, they had a pretty dramatic impact. Within 10 years, the freight claims for robberies had fallen by 92.7%. Their clearance rates, a 1992 study, reported that if you compare their clearance rates to public police clearance rates, adjusting for reporting behavior, because a lot more crimes against railroads get reported to the railroad police than victims report crimes to the public police. So adjusting for reporting behavior, you can see that the railroad police are roughly 3 times as likely to clear offense. That's not a great number, of course. It's hard to clear a lot of offenses, but nonetheless, compared to the private police, it's pretty startling. So this is a fully operational police force. They got cars, they got helicopters, they got all that stuff, officers and investigative personnel and so on. And it's been going now for almost 100 years. Another example of private investigation, they have a bad name, but I don't think it's really deserved. There's about 14,000 private bail bondsmen in the United States. They issue what's so-called surety bonds for criminals who are accused, so they can get out of jail until the trial, essentially. And they have a couple million defendants every year holding these private surety bonds. If the criminal doesn't show up for trial, the bondsman loses his money. So he wants to make sure they're going to show up for trial. And there is a system of private bounty hunters, I guess you would call them, who work for these bondsmen to track down people when they don't show up for trial, and make make sure they are going to be there for the next round and that sort of thing. The interesting thing about this example is that there's a public alternative. There's a public pre-trial release program. Supposedly it's to help people who can't afford to put down the down payment or the amount that they have to put down for a surety bond. But the fact is that most of these people who go through the public pretrial release program, over half of them don't have to pay anything. So they don't take anything out of their pocket to leave on the table to come back for. So not surprisingly, lots of them don't come back for trials. So you got release on your own recognizance. The judge might say, you bond this amount, but you don't have to secure it, so you don't have to have any money. Or there might be some sort of conditions for release. And some of them pay a deposit bond, much like the surety bond. But if you look at the numbers for turning up for trial, you can see almost a third of the unsecured bonds, over 25% of the release on their own recognizance and so on, don't make it to trial, compared with the 18% for surety bonds. I think the most interesting numbers, however, are after a year, because these are the guys that get tracked down by the bail bondsmen, bounty hunters, or by the public police. The public police is supposed to go after them if they're on public arrangements, and you can see about 3% of the security or the surety bonds don't show up, compared to everything is double that or more with the private sector operation. So the point is that the private sector can do investigation. They do it a lot, and making it possible to do more is, I'm talking too much. It's going to make the system more efficient, I think. So if you turn now to collecting restitution, there's lots of ways to go about doing this. You could have bounty hunters, people post rewards. You could have contracts with private security firms who also take on the role of investigation. Separate investigative firms, or lawyers may have contracts with these investigative firms. Private right to restitution means that the victim can anticipate having money to pay for such things, because presumably they're going to get compensated for both the harm done to them and the cost of collecting. So there are lots of ways to think about doing that. Private prosecution is essentially illegal in the United States in a lot of ways. You can hire a private prosecutor under some limited circumstances if you get permission from the public prosecutor. There are other places where private prosecution is much more heavily practiced. But there's no reason why we couldn't have private prosecution of criminal activity just the way we do with tort activity. People could contract with lawyers on a contingency fee basis, and they go after prosecuting the offender, suing for damages. Let's turn to this. How do you convince these guys to pay? Why would they ever be willing to pay? First of all, of course, if we have more reporting and more effective private pursuit and all those sorts of things, crime would be lower anyway, so there wouldn't be as many of them. The way things work today is that about 98% of the convictions that we get in the United States are through plea bargain. So the prosecutor tells the offender, I won't charge you with these 6 crimes if you've been guilty of that one. Or I won't charge you for a significant crime, commit to the lower one. And that way, when you get a conviction, you'll go off to prison for a while, but usually not to compensate all those victims out there whose crimes have been forgiven, reduced, and so on. There is a bargaining process then in prosecution today. I would anticipate a very similar process in the system I'm envisioning, except the bargaining is going to be between the victim and the offender, or perhaps their lawyers, rather than between a public official and a public prosecutor, who's supposed to represent the victims, but there's the link between public prosecutors and victims is pretty weak. I doubt that too many crimes would be forgiven if you're bargaining directly with the victim, the way they are with public prosecution. But certainly that's a possibility. There's nothing that says it couldn't happen. And in fact, we have examples in Japan. Before the criminal trial, someone, usually from the offender's family, goes to the victim or the victim's family and says, boy, this guy feels bad, he did that. Could we talk about, he apologize and maybe pay some restitution, and maybe you'll feel better about it, and then you could write a letter to the judge saying that he's remorseful and that he's compensating you, and the judge then hands out a real light sentence, if he hands out a sentence at all. So lots of private negotiation, actually mostly mediation, so there's a third party working as a go-between between the victim and the offender. In the United States, we have all these community mediation centers, community dispute resolution programs. Every place has them. Most of us don't really know much about them, but one thing they do mediate is crimes where they bring the victims and the offender together, sometimes with family, sometimes with witnesses, sometimes other people involved, and they sit them down and try to work out a deal. That's not their only function. They do lots of domestic violence and stuff like that as well. The other option, you can see here, a lot of them do specialized mediation with just juvenile offenders. Some do with adult offenders. Some do felonies. Most do misdemeanors. The other alternative that's developed specializes exclusively on crime, and these are victor offender mediation programs. And there were 289 of them in 2000. Hundreds of them around the world. Some of these programs actually started in New Zealand, and Australia, and Canada, and were picked up in the United States. They tend to do minor, relatively minor crimes, mostly because a lot of these, they have to get permission from the public prosecutor, and he doesn't want to mess with those, so he lets them go to mediation But as you can see in this quote, a lot of them actually are getting into more and more significant kinds of felonies, even murder. So these things are happening. Again, whether we realize it or not, the private sector is moving into these kinds of activities. These victim offender mediation programs are pretty successful. They, as you can see, about 92% of the cases, they reach an agreement, sign a contract, 99% of them are fulfilled. So, and most of that is some sort of restitution. Might not be money, might be mowing somebody's lawn for a month or something like that. There's a lot of alternatives in terms of restitution, but that's how these programs work. Private courts, I'm not going to talk a lot about private courts. The private sector has lots of courts already. Private arbitration, private mediation systems, all labor disputes go to arbitration, almost all commercial disputes go to arbitration. And any contract you sign anymore, if you read it, you're going to find an arbitration clause in it. There's lots of arbitration going on. There's also an interesting phenomenon in the United States. We have a private for-profit court industry that's developed, where it started in California. A retired judge got hired by a couple of lawyers who were trying to get a case resolved quickly, and the delay to get into the public court was about 4.5 years. So they hired this private judge to sit and listen to their arguments and make a decision. And they did it. It was a very complex case, but they pulled it off in about 3 months. And other people saw what they did and thought, wow, that's the way to go. We don't have to wait for the public courts. And so private judges in California, or public judges in California, started retiring early so they could go into business. One entrepreneurial judge actually started hiring other judges to work for his firm. And it's now JANS, it's called, Judicial Arbitration and Mediation Services. You can buy stocks. These private courts have developed extensively already. They would move, I would suggest, into this area of tort if allowed to. They can't do criminal trials, but they could do tort trials, and so if we move out of crime into tort, they could do so. Let's see, what's his name? Who's got Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston? When they got divorced, they hired a private for-profit judge. Okay, so collecting the restitution. This is the part that disturbs people mostly, I guess. The offender, in my vision, when he violates somebody else's rights, he is outside the law until he pays compensation to get back inside. And so, but I don't want to try to force people to pay. I argue establish rights to victims for restitution, allow offender victim mediation or arbitration or whatever, to work out a contract between the parties specifying what the compensation should be, how long a period can be taken to pay off the debt, and what kind of supervision can be applied to make sure this offender does pay off the debt. And then, and so, you know, depending on the risk of fleeing, it could be an ankle bracelet, or it could be, it shows up at a halfway house every night, or it could be in a prison work program. The victim has to agree to whatever it's going to be. But these individuals, these offenders, then have property rights in their labor. So they can contract with a private firm specializing probably in the use of prison labor or convicted offenders' labor. This private firm would be like a collection firm, but also probably integrated with some manufacturing process or something like that. Sounds a little far-fetched, maybe, but the fact is it's going on. There's lots of prison work programs in place today. This is an interesting example. Heard a while back, the Maine prison craft operation. They had a warden at one point who said, you know, if prisoners make these crafts, we'll sell them in the prison store, and they can benefit from it. They don't get paid in money, but some sort of coupons that you can use in the prison store and things like that. Some of the money can go into accounts for the family and so on. This market just exploded when he started letting people do it. He let them patent some of their designs and stuff like that. So, and then he let them form firms. So one entrepreneurial prisoner will put together a group to maybe build ships in an assembly line kind of process or something. Some of these guys came out of prison and started new firms making these kinds of things afterwards. So the turnout, the willingness to work, these guys are bored to death in prison. They're happy to have something to do. And working, especially if you're going to learn something, is attractive. These guys, these entrepreneurs in the Maine prison, even put the clamps on the gang violence because it was disrupting their production. And so they told them to quit, and yes, backed it up. We don't know how to back it up. But prison industries, you know, prisoners used to make license plates. That's not what prison industries is today. They are manufacturing plants inside prisons, making all sorts of different things. This is just the Federal Bureau of Prisons operation. There's three states, I think, that don't have private prison industries programs now. Every other state does some sort of prison industry program. Some of them are run by the state, but some of them, like Kansas, it's private firms that are contracted with the state to work for them inside the prison. And so I guess the point of all of this is that every step in this process that we think about, the private sector is already involved. They're already doing this stuff. They just need to be allowed to do it more, and then we shut down the most expensive single item in every local government's budget, police, and one of the most expensive items in every state budget, the prisons, and turn it all over to the private sector. Have a better life. Private prisons, I guess I should close with this. Who's going to supervise these prisons? Well, you're probably aware that there's already lots of private contracting, government contracting with private firms to run prisons for them. And so, again, the private sector is doing it. It's not something that is unthinkable. I have a fairly long discussion of how to deal with madmen and martyrs and all that sort of stuff. But I'm running out of time, so I'll skip over that, and anyone who wants to talk about it afterwards, I'd be happy to talk to you. The conclusion essentially is that if we really want a justice system that focuses on justice for victims instead of worrying about how much punishment to impose on people, then we need to reorient the system away from crime to tort, away from crime, criminal punishment, victim restitution, and we need to open up the private process to the private sector to make it work. If the government wants to compete with the private sector, I'm not bothered by that at all. I think they'll lose the competition, but that would be fine. Just let the private sector go to work. I'll stop there.
If anybody has a question, Benson?
Everybody's just so flabbergasted for us.
I wonder if you could update me on one thing. About 10 years ago, I remember people used to complain about the fact, oh, when we privatize these prisons and that's not working, and it's an example that privatization doesn't work. I didn't know enough about the issue at the time to actually engage one debate, because they clearly could have been wrong. But what's been going on in the literature on that and that debate about whether the privatization of prisons has been successful or not?
It's still going. You know, especially union, public unions are arguing that they don't work because if they work, then lots of other things might work as well. The evidence, in fact, a lot of states will not, Florida will not contract with a private firm to run a prison unless they will sell their services for 7% less than it would cost to use the public system. So that suggests, you know, they're reducing costs. Some people say they're cutting quality. There's really no evidence, convincing evidence of that. I gave a talk to the Midwest Public Prosecutors Association meetings a few years ago, and they set me up. They had me on a panel with a guy from the prison guards union, and they had this story about this one private prison in Ohio that had a prison break, and 3 bad guys, really serious felons, got out, and they were ultimately caught. But he said, boy, Ohio will never contract with that firm again. And I said, exactly. That's what's good about the private process. If they don't do it, you don't recontract. You try to shut down a public prison, it's a whole other story. The competition is intense. I think there's a couple really big firms now, several other firms doing it. It's spread to Great Britain, Australia. I think it wouldn't be spreading if it wasn't doing what people expected it to do. The debate will continue as long as there's public alternatives. They'll say something bad about private prison, and they're not perfect. After all, what you get as a buyer is what you pay for. So if the state doesn't want to pay well, they can get a privately run facility that's terrible. In fact, there was a case in Florida quite a long time ago where a private philanthropic organization took over running a juvenile facility that had just, it was terribly run, really a nasty place. They took it over, but the state wouldn't give them enough money to really bring it up to where it should be. So they still had a lot of problems with it, but they do better than the state.
So you talked about, possibility of privatizing law enforcement and how that would be contract out for tort laws, or really contract out for handles restitution, private courts. So my question would be, how do you deal with like income disparities between the people who are able to pay, like what's stuff like, a very rich person like buying off lawyers that are going to need like something else.
That's a good question, and not one that I can give a definitive answer to, because I think that the courts would work it out. I mean, we, if I look at systems, historical systems that were primarily restitution-based systems, they worked it out. In England, for instance, they had what was called the man price system, where lords, people, big shots, if they were a victim, they got paid more. But if they were an offender, they had to pay. So the payments were actually not just restitution, but they had built in this deterrence kind of mechanism. And it made sense for them because they wanted these powerful individuals to be part of the cooperative arrangement. You know, if you're rich and somebody steals some of your crop or something like that, it may not be even worth your time to go after it. But that undermines the deterrent effect of the whole system. And so they said, well, if you're rich, you get paid more. On the other hand, if you are rich and you kill somebody, you have to pay more. Your payment is bigger than it would have been. So I'm not saying that that's how it would work here, but you know, the tort system has worked out the value of a person's arm. What if you can't work for the rest of your life? All those sorts of things. The tort system has come up with payment structures that apparently are acceptable to society. And I would expect the same sort of thing here. In terms of poor people not having access to justice, I think they have a lot more access here than they do in the current system. You know, poor people don't get a lot of attention by the police. It's the wealthy people that have patrols and things like that usually. But you, as a poor person, for instance, in tort law, you can find a lawyer who will work on a contingency fee. You don't have to pay him anything until they win. So that, and then you have the example I gave of the private security firm specializing in low-income housing protection. They didn't go to the low-income people themselves. They went to somebody who's providing them with housing and said, we can make your product better for those people and reduce your costs if you hire us. And so they move in and protect these poor communities. The other thing, of course, is that if a private firm or employee of a private firm is abusive, they get sued. And so if a public police officer is negligent or abusive, you're not going to collect much from them. You may, under certain circumstances, be able to sue the city. Most cities have very large pots of money going out to victims of those police mistreatment. that, but, the private firm that puts up with that kind of violence or abuse is gonna go out of business. Probably because they lose all their money in court case.
So one criticism I've heard leveled against privately run prisons is that they will lobby for tougher sentencing on crimes in order to keep the prisons filled, so they continue to collect revenue from maintaining the prisoners there. Have there been any studies or any papers examining that kind of effect?
It certainly has been tossed around, and I think it's true. I think when you're buying stuff from government, or when you're selling something to government, you want the government to increase the demand for what you're selling. And so they lobby to increase the demand through passing longer sentences and so on. Of course, the biggest lobbyists in the criminal justice arena actually are public police and prosecutors. Most of the laws that get changed are laws that come from their hands. But yeah, anytime, I'm not saying these guys working in the private sector are perfect. They're just like anyone else. If there's an advantage they can get through the government, they're going to go after it. If we did this, there wouldn't be any advantage to lobbying the government. The government has no finger in it.
I'm going to take the prerogative to ask one last, and make one comment and then ask one that question. To sort of follow up on Hart's point, when you say we already have a lot of disparity between high-income individuals and low-income individuals in the current legal system, right? Can I already hire, if I'm rich, the best lawyer and so forth?
Okay.
The other thing that I want to ask though is about the restitution. So what happens if someone commits a crime against me, they have no assets to, how do they make restitution in the system? How we can expect? What's that?
They work it off.
They work it off.
Yeah, one criticism of restitution is that a lot of offenders are judgment proof. They don't have any assets. But no restitution program I've ever looked at demands immediate payment. If you can't pay, some of them actually you become an indentured servant of the victim. I don't think that would work in the United States, but those are the kinds of arrangements that typically develop so that people can pay over time. A lot of communities also form insurance pools, essentially. So if a member, say, my family is my extended family, I got one nephew that's a bad kid, and he goes off and commits a crime against somebody else, and he gets caught, and he can't pay. So he has to work for the victim, and the victim is going to treat him bad because he's really upset about it. Well, my family might then go and pay the victim and make the kid work it off for us. And a lot of these systems have these sorts of insurance arrangements that, my view of this whole system, I didn't talk about the martyrs and madmen and things like that, but is that insurance companies will become, there's going to be a tremendous amount of innovation in the insurance market, and they're going to get really heavily involved in this whole process. I gave this talk a while back, and there were some insurance people in the audience. They loved it. They just thought this was exactly what we needed to do because they could see all sorts of openings for it. I think a lot of people would buy insurance, and essentially then the insurance company would have the right to go after the guy to collect, because the insurance payment would compensate the victim. It's hard to, obviously we're not going to jump to it right now. It's hard to imagine all the intricacies unless you spend 20 years thinking about it, I guess.
out again and remind you that we've got more events tomorrow. There's 2 events tomorrow, so we'll grab a schedule on your way out. And thank you all for coming this evening. Appreciate it.